The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. Its rhythm against the courthouse windows was slow and steady, almost like the heartbeat of the city itself, heavy, tired, and uncertain. Inside Judge Caprio's courtroom, the hum of conversation dimmed as the next case was called. James Holloway, the clerk announced, her voice echoing through the chamber. A frail man stepped forward. His clothes were worn, his shoes soaked from the rain. He clutched a folded citation with trembling hands. When he lifted his head, the fluorescent light revealed a face marked by both age and endurance, the kind of face that had seen things no one in the room could imagine. Judge Caprio leaned forward, peering over his glasses. "Good morning, sir. You're here for a traffic violation, crossing against a red light, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," James replied, his voice low, respectful. The courtroom expected another routine case. A warning, a fine, maybe a few kind words from the famously compassionate judge. But there was something about the man's tone that made the room quieter than usual. Judge Caprio tilted his head slightly. "Mr. Holloway, where do you live?" James hesitated. "Nowhere, really. I stay wherever I can." A few whispers spread through the courtroom. The judge's expression softened. "You're homeless?" "Yes, sir." The words hung in the air. Outside, thunder rolled softly as if even the sky paused to listen. Judge Caprio didn't rush the moment. "How long has it been since you've had a place of your own?" James took a breath, eyes fixed on the floor. "Almost 6 years, Your Honor." There was no anger in his tone, only quiet acceptance. But then a faint glint caught the judge's attention. Around James's neck hung a small, weathered dog tag. The judge leaned forward again. "Are you a veteran?" James looked up for the first time. His eyes, tired, sunken but proud, met the judge's. "Yes, sir. United States Marine Corps. Served overseas, a long time ago." The room fell into absolute silence. Even those scrolling through their phones lowered them slowly. Judge Caprio's gaze softened further. "A Marine standing before this court for a jaywalking ticket." He paused, his voice low but firm. "Tell me, Mr. Holloway, what happened?" James's fingers tightened around the citation. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Your Honor, it's a long story. But it all started the night I saved someone's life." The entire courtroom leaned forward. Judge Caprio's brows furrowed. "You saved someone's life?" James nodded faintly. "Yes, sir. But that was before everything changed." The judge sat back slowly, his eyes searching the man's face. The rain outside grew louder, matching the tension in the room. And then, with quiet gravity, Judge Caprio asked the question that would set the tone for everything that followed. "How does a man who once risked everything end up here, alone and forgotten?" Long before the courtroom, long before the rain-soaked streets became his only home, James Holloway was a name that carried weight and pride. He was 24 when he joined the Marine Corps, lean, determined, and burning with purpose. Back then he believed in service, in honor, in the idea that courage could change the world. He had stood in deserts where the air shimmered with heat and fear. He had carried brothers on his shoulders through smoke and fire. He had written letters to his mother promising her he'd come back in one piece, and somehow he did. But what he didn't understand then was that not every wound bleeds on the outside. When he returned home, the parades were over. The neighbors had moved on. The war had become a headline no one wanted to read anymore. James tried to rebuild. He found a job at a warehouse, rented a small apartment, and kept to himself. But nights were the hardest. In the dark, the echoes returned, the blasts, the shouts, the faces he couldn't save. Sleep was a battlefield of its own. His supervisors began to notice the tremors in his hands, the faraway look in his eyes when loud machinery went off. One day they called him into an office and said the words that stripped him bare, "You're not fit for duty here anymore." After that, things unraveled fast. The rent piled up, the phone stopped ringing, and the silence grew heavier. He lost his home, then his car, then, slowly, his sense of place in the world. He carried his dog tag still, the last proof that once he had mattered. Every morning he'd wake under a bridge or behind a diner, brush the dust from his jacket and whisper, "One more day." He'd volunteer at shelters when he could, sometimes fixing broken tables, sometimes just helping others find a warm meal before himself. But even in that quiet despair, a spark of duty never left him. One cold November night, while walking behind a convenience store looking for leftover food, he heard something, a scream. "Sure. Real." A woman's voice. He froze for a second. It was late, the streets were empty. Then another cry echoed from the alley. Without thinking he ran toward it. Under a flickering streetlight he saw her, a young woman being dragged by two men toward a van. She was fighting, kicking, gasping for air. James didn't stop to count odds or think of consequences. He charged forward with the same instinct that had carried him through war. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the night. One of the attackers turned, swinging wildly. James tackled him to the ground. The second man fled when he saw the fire in those weary eyes, the kind of courage that doesn't come from strength but from survival. The fight was fast, messy, desperate. When it was over, James was bleeding, his knuckles raw, but the woman was safe. He helped her to her feet, asking softly, "Are you all right?" She was shaking too hard to answer. He gave her his jacket, even though it was his only one. When the police sirens finally approached, James stepped back into the shadows. By the time they arrived, he was gone. No name, no story, just a trace of blood and a jacket with faded marine patches. That night, he found an old church stoop and sat there until dawn, nursing his bruises and whispering a quiet prayer. He didn't want credit. He didn't need applause. He only needed to know that somewhere out there, someone got to see another sunrise because he had been there. But life has a cruel way of staying silent about heroes who ask for nothing. No newspaper mentioned him. No city official thanked him. And as weeks turned into years, that night became just another memory swallowed by the streets. Until the day fate led him into Judge Caprio's courtroom, where the truth, long buried under time and rain, was finally about to be heard. Back in Judge Caprio's courtroom, the storm outside seemed to echo what was happening inside, quiet thunder rumbling behind every heartbeat. James Holloway stood still, his shoulders drawn in, his citation trembling in his hands. The judge looked at him not as a defendant but as a mystery. "Mr. Holloway," Caprio said gently, "you mentioned saving someone's life. Would you like to tell us what you meant by that?" James hesitated. His gaze lowered. "It was a long time ago, Your Honor. It doesn't matter anymore." But the judge didn't look away. His voice softened. "Everything that makes you who you are matters in this courtroom." Before James could answer, a commotion stirred in the gallery. A woman had entered, mid-30s, professional, her nurse's uniform still creased from a long shift. She looked nervous, clutching her bag as if it were a lifeline. Judge Caprio noticed her immediately. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Her voice trembled. "Your Honor, I think I can help him." The room turned. Even James looked up, puzzled. She took a cautious step forward. "My name is Emily Reed. I believe this man saved my life." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Caprio leaned forward, his tone both curious and cautious. "You're saying Mr. Holloway saved your life?" Emily nodded, tears welling. "Yes, sir. 6 years ago, behind a convenience store on Elm Street. 2 men tried to drag me into a van. Someone appeared out of nowhere, fought them off, and stayed until he was sure I could call for help. When the police arrived, he was gone. They never found him." The courtroom fell silent. You could almost hear the rain pressing against the windows. Emily's voice cracked. "I've never forgotten his face. I looked for him everywhere, but there was never a record, until last week. I was reading a local report online and saw a name in the arrest list. James Holloway. I knew it immediately. That was him." Judge Caprio glanced at James, who stood frozen, stunned by the weight of recognition. Emily turned toward him. "It's you, isn't it?" she whispered. "You were that man." James's eyes softened, but he said quietly, "You're safe. That's all that mattered." The gallery was motionless. A young intern near the back wiped a tear without realizing it. The judge exhaled slowly, visibly moved. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "is that true?" James hesitated. "I didn't think anyone remembered. I just did what I was trained to do." Emily stepped closer, voice shaking. "You didn't just save me. You gave me back my life. I wouldn't be here, wouldn't have become a nurse if it wasn't for you." Judge Caprio's eyes glistened behind his glasses. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why walk away?" James's answer came low and heavy. "Because heroes don't exist, Your Honor, not out here. I didn't have the strength to explain who I used to be. People look at me now and see nothing but the streets." The judge leaned back, his expression filled with quiet disbelief and sorrow. "You served your country, saved a life, and somehow, the system let you fall through the cracks." He turned to the clerk. "Run a background check on Mr. Holloway." Moments later, papers slid across the bench. Caprio read in silence. Honorable discharge, medical reports noting PTSD, denied benefits due to processing errors. He sighed deeply. "You were denied help?" James nodded. "They said I missed a form. I sent letters, called offices, but you can only fight so long before you run out of strength." The judge set the papers down, visibly struggling to stay composed. And yet you never gave up on others. Emily wiped her tears. He didn't just save my life, Your Honor. He reminded me what courage looks like. I became a nurse because I wanted to honor that night, to give people the care he gave me. The courtroom was silent again, but this time the silence felt sacred. The story had transformed everything. This wasn't about a fine or a law. It was about gratitude long delayed. Judge Caprio finally spoke, voice firm but full of compassion. Mr. Holloway, this city may have forgotten you, but I assure you, we won't let that happen again. James lowered his head, whispering almost to himself, I didn't do it for thanks. I just couldn't walk away. The judge smiled softly. That's exactly what makes it remarkable. The people in the gallery began to clap, hesitant at first, then stronger, not as a form of applause but as recognition. James looked overwhelmed, unsure what to do with the world suddenly remembering him again. And as the sound faded, Judge Caprio leaned forward, his tone quieter now, but carrying across every heart in the room. Mr. Holloway, this case is no longer about a red light. It's about how a country can forget its heroes until one moment reminds us. Compassion is not a luxury, it's a duty. The camera would linger on James's face, humble, astonished, a single tear tracing the path of years lost, as the judge prepared for a decision that would change more than one man's life. For a long moment the courtroom said nothing. The rain outside softened to a whisper, like the world itself was waiting for what came next. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, hands clasped, eyes fixed on James Holloway, a man who had seen the best and worst of humanity and was somehow still standing. Mr. Holloway, he said quietly, I'd like you to tell us in your own words, what happened after that night. After you saved Emily. James's throat tightened. He hesitated, his fingers grazing the dog tag around his neck as though it were a lifeline to something distant and fragile. Your Honor, he began slowly, when you've seen war, you don't come back the same. You can leave the battlefield, but the battlefield doesn't leave you. He took a shaky breath. That night I saved her, I walked away because I didn't want attention. Soldiers don't do it for medals. We just do what we were trained to do, run toward danger when others run away. He paused, staring down at the polished courtroom floor. But when the adrenaline fades, you're left alone with the silence. That silence can be the loudest sound in the world. The people in the gallery leaned in. Even the court officers stood still. James's voice grew softer. After that night I tried to rebuild. I wanted to believe there was still a place for me out there. But every door I knocked on, every job interview, every veteran's office, it all ended the same way. Forms. Promises. We'll call you back. But no one ever did. He swallowed hard, his tone breaking. You start believing maybe you don't deserve help. Maybe you were meant to disappear. Judge Caprio's eyes glistened. Emily covered her mouth, already trembling. James continued, I'd walk past diners at night and see families laughing. I'd hear people complaining about traffic or bills or cold coffee, and I'd think, God, they have no idea how lucky they are. He looked up, his gaze hollow yet steady. Sometimes, Your Honor, the hardest battle starts after the war. Not against enemies, but against yourself. The words hung in the air like smoke. James blinked slowly, forcing the next sentences out. There were nights when I couldn't take it anymore. Nights when I thought about ending it. You start thinking you're a ghost in your own life, walking through the world, invisible to everyone. A tear slid down Emily's cheek. She stood abruptly and stepped closer, ignoring the usual formality of the courtroom. Her voice cracked as she said, Don't say that. You don't know how many people you've saved just by being here. James shook his head gently. I didn't save anyone, Emily. I just stopped something bad from happening. She reached out, her trembling hand finding his. You saved me. And because you did, I've saved others. Every patient I've treated since that night, every life that didn't fade away, it's part of you. Don't you see? You didn't disappear. You multiplied. The room went utterly still. Judge Caprio looked down, adjusting his glasses, trying to mask the emotion in his eyes. Even the stenographer paused for a breath. James's lip quivered. I never thought I'd hear that, he whispered. Emily gripped his hand tighter. You deserve to hear it. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. Mr. Holloway, the city failed you. The system failed you. But you never failed your duty as a man, a Marine, or a human being. He exhaled slowly, then looked at the audience. Do you all realize what this means? A man with nothing left still chose to protect a stranger. That's what defines true service. The gallery erupted in quiet murmurs, people nodding, phones discreetly recording. But this wasn't the kind of viral moment meant for entertainment, it was history captured through tears. James lowered his head again as though the attention itself felt too heavy. I didn't come here to be a hero, Your Honor. I came here because I crossed the street when the light was red. That's all. Judge Caprio smiled faintly. No, Mr. Holloway. That's not all. You crossed the line of duty long ago, and you never stopped walking toward what's right. Emily couldn't hold it in anymore. She sobbed quietly, stepping closer until she was beside him. She rested her hand on his shoulder. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. James looked up, eyes glistening. I just didn't want anyone to remember me as a burden. Caprio's reply was instant, steady, and filled with warmth. A burden? No, sir. You are a reminder of everything good this country still has. Tears welled across the room, silent tears, the kind that come not from sadness but from recognition. For a moment, even the cameras capturing the session seemed irrelevant. What mattered was humanity, raw and unfiltered. The judge wiped his eyes discreetly. Mr. Holloway, I've sat on this bench for decades. I've heard excuses, I've seen guilt, I've seen anger. But what I've seen today is courage in its purest form. James tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. Courage doesn't feel like much when you're cold, hungry, and forgotten. Caprio's voice softened. That's because real courage rarely feels heroic. Feels lonely. Feels endless. But it's what makes the world bearable for the rest of us. The air in the courtroom grew heavier with each word. And then, in a moment so human it transcended law and order, Judge Caprio stood, breaking the formality that defined his courtroom. He approached the bench, walked down the steps, and placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. Mr. Holloway, he said quietly, you're not alone anymore. The audience broke into applause, soft at first, then growing, echoing against the marble walls like a heartbeat revived. James looked around, bewildered, humbled. He wasn't invisible anymore. For the first time in years the world saw him, truly saw him. And as the applause slowly faded, Judge Caprio returned to his bench, his expression resolute but heavy with thought. He knew the next words he spoke would matter more than any verdict he'd ever given. Because now it wasn't just a case. It was redemption, for one man, and for everyone who had ever walked past someone like him and never looked twice. The unspoken question hung in the air like lightning before a storm. What would the judge do now? For a long moment, the courtroom remained wrapped in silence, not the kind born of fear or tension, but of reverence. Every soul in the room knew they were witnessing something rare, a moment where justice was about to meet humanity. Judge Caprio sat still, fingers folded over his notes, eyes fixed on the man standing before him. James Holloway, once a Marine, once a hero, now a symbol of everything the system had forgotten to protect. The judge exhaled slowly, then rose from his seat. When he spoke, his voice carried both gravity and grace. Mr. Holloway, he began, I've presided over thousands of cases, men and women from every walk of life. Some come here in anger, others in regret. But you came here with quiet dignity. And I believe the world needs to hear what dignity sounds like. He paused, letting the words settle. You served this country with honor. You protected a stranger with courage. And yet, for years, you've received nothing in return but silence. James stood motionless, unsure where the judge's words were leading. Caprio continued, his tone deepening. When I was a young man, my father used to say, son, never pass judgment until you've walked through another man's storm. His eyes glistened faintly. Today I see the storm you've walked through, and somehow you're still standing. He turned to the clerk. As of this moment, all charges against Mr. Holloway are dismissed. A wave of emotion spread through the room, gasps, sighs, a few muffled sobs. Caprio raised his hand gently. That's not all, he said softly. The city of Providence owes you more than words. So, on behalf of this court, I will be recommending to the mayor's office that you receive immediate access to veteran housing, full medical assistance, and an official commendation for bravery. James blinked in disbelief. Your Honor, you don't have to. But Caprio cut him off with a small, fatherly smile. Yes, I do. This is what justice looks like when we remember that laws were made for people, not the other way around. The courtroom erupted in applause. Some stood. Others wiped their eyes. The energy was electric, pure, cleansing, as if everyone in that room had been waiting for this kind of redemption in their own lives. Caprio waited until the noise softened, then spoke again. Mr. Holloway, he said, his voice steady but full of warmth, you remind us that one act of kindness, one moment of courage, can ripple for years. You saved Emily Reed's life. But today you've done something even greater. You reminded all of us that compassion isn't weakness. It's strength. Emily stepped forward through the crowd, her face shining with tears. She threw her arms around James, her voice breaking. You were my guardian then, and you still are. The courtroom quieted again as she turned toward the judge. Your Honor, if it's allowed, I'd like to offer him a job at my clinic. We need people like him, people who understand what life is worth. Caprio smiled, clearly moved. That's one of the best sentences ever spoken in this courtroom. James looked at her, speechless. Emily, I don't know what to say. Say you'll come, she whispered. For the first time James smiled, small, hesitant but real. Then I'll come. Applause rose once more, this time unstoppable. Even the court officers couldn't hide their emotion. Phones recorded, not out of voyeurism but reverence, a moment they wanted to remember. Judge Caprio raised his gavel but didn't strike it. Let's not make this about punishment or pity, he said, his voice gentle yet commanding. Let's make it about gratitude. This man served us. It's time we serve him. That line struck through the air like scripture. Caprio finally stepped down from the bench and approached James, extending his hand. The two men shook hands firmly, and for a moment it wasn't a judge and a defendant. It was a nation, thanking a forgotten hero through one man's gesture. The judge turned toward the courtroom audience. If you leave here with anything today, he said, let it be this. Justice isn't found in paperwork or fines. It's found in moments like these, when we remember that mercy can restore what time has broken. He smiled faintly at James. Mr. Holloway, you once said heroes don't exist out here anymore. I think today proved otherwise. James lowered his head, tears glistening on his cheeks. Thank you, Your Honor. I won't forget this. Caprio nodded. Neither will we. As the session adjourned, the courtroom rose to its feet, a standing ovation that filled the space with warmth and light. Reporters whispered, veterans saluted, strangers hugged. And in the middle of it all, James stood humbled, the weight of years slowly lifting from his shoulders. It wasn't just a verdict. It was a restoration, of dignity, of hope, of faith in what justice could still be. And as Judge Caprio returned to his bench, he looked once more toward the man who had endured it all and whispered softly to himself, almost like a prayer. May we never forget the ones who kept us free, even when we forgot them. The rain had stopped. The sky above Providence stretched open, pale, blue and quiet, as if the world itself wanted to give James Holloway a moment of peace. The courthouse steps glistened from the earlier storm, and James walked down them slowly, one careful step at a time. In his hand, folded neatly, was a piece of paper, his official referral for veteran housing. To anyone else it might have seemed ordinary. But to him it was something sacred. It was proof that after all the years of wandering, the road might finally lead somewhere that felt like home. Behind him, the heavy doors of the courtroom closed with a soft echo. Inside, people were still talking about what they had just witnessed. Not a case but a revelation. Judge Caprio's words lingered in every heart. Justice isn't about punishment, it's about recognizing humanity. As James stepped onto the street, the late afternoon light caught the edge of his dog tag, making it glimmer faintly. He looked at it, then tucked it beneath his shirt, close to his heart. For years, it had been a reminder of battles fought and brothers lost. Now it was a reminder that kindness could still win wars, quiet ones fought in courtrooms and on city sidewalks, where dignity is the only uniform left. He stopped for a moment, looking up at the sky. The air smelled clean after the storm. People passed by, strangers, but for once they didn't look through him. A woman smiled. A young man nodded. A small boy saluted. And James, caught off guard, smiled back. The narration softens. Every city has its shadows, but sometimes, inside those shadows walk the brightest souls. Veterans, nurses, mothers, neighbors, the heroes we forget until their courage reminds us what it means to be human. As the camera follows him crossing the street, legally this time, the voice continues, maybe justice isn't a verdict. Maybe it's the moment we finally see each other, not for what we've lost, but for what we've endured. He disappears around the corner, sunlight falling across his back. And to the audience, the narrator speaks directly. Friends, if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little faith in the world again. Because sometimes, compassion isn't just something we feel, it's something we pass on. A soft pause. Then the final words fade in gently, filled with warmth and promise. Next week, another story where compassion changed everything. The screen fades to black, not with sadness but with hope.